Hello and welcome to another episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews, and today we'll be taking a look at the new S.H. MonsterArts Godzilla 2002 figure. Yes, it's not every day that we get a new sculpt from MonsterArts, and when it does come around it's always a very special event, and this is no different. So, first of all, I'll just note that, yes, I'm using a slightly different format for my videos I'm going to be trying out, and that's where usually my sort of main reviews have been videos where I've had what's it called? I've had a script and I've recorded the voiceover, you know, in my little recording studio, and it's all fancy audio, and I sync it all up to lots of film clips of close-ups of the figure and all of that sort of stuff. And since I've been cutting down on a lot of time that I can devote to making these videos, and I got some good feedback on my last review where I did this, that being the X Plus Shin Godzilla review, which though was not my best sort of on-screen presence, it did get a lot of good results there. I figured I'd give doing this sort of format another try, and so try and blend the two by doing a sort of more impromptu initial reaction that's not scripted, but just filmed and edited a little bit more nicely. So hopefully, you know, give me feedback on this and all that, and whether you prefer the old method or this one, but it looks like this one is going to be the way to go for my channel in the future, just based on time and stuff like that. But without further ado, let's get into the figure. So I'm about to cut away from this angle, and I'll give you a really good look at this guy. Alright guys, so here he is. Just before I get into my thoughts about the figure, I'll just give you a quick overview of my thoughts about the design. So, and just a little backstory on the design. So it's basically just a slightly altered version of the Godzilla 2000 design. So he's got that same jagged spines that you saw in Godzilla 2000, and just the same sort of basic body shape, slight tweaking to the face and some other little elements here and there, and his atomic beam is now blue in this movie instead of the fiery red we saw in Godzilla 2000 and Megaguirus. So, onto the figure. So, this figure is one of the first new sculpts we've got since the anime Godzilla, and it's the return of Yuji Sakai as sculptor to this line. So very, very happy to see him back, because the sculpt on this thing, just right off the bat, is the best thing about this figure. Its selling point. It's phenomenal, really. He looks almost just like he did in the movie, and that's something that's very very common sort of thing to praise Yuji Sakai's sculpts about. Pretty much all of them are to a very high standard, and this one is no different. Very highly detailed, very expressive, and very well textured. When I took this guy out of the box, and speaking of the box, I've got it here, but if you wanna see it a little better, just go to my unboxing video for this guy. I go over the box a lot better in that one, and you get to see my sort of initial reaction. But yeah, so the texture on this guy is one of the best things about him. Like, when I first took him out, one of the first things I noticed was the texturing right across the back here. You see that very, very jagged, very rough skin, very similar, in fact, to the Millennium Godzilla release, which is also a Yuji Sakai sculpt and based roughly off Godzilla 2000. It was actually based. I've got it here, the special color version. I also have the original, but I have the special color version with me for a very special reason. But I'll get into that in a sec. So yeah, very similar to the Millennium Godzilla here in texturing, but don't be fooled and think that these two figures are interchangeable. A lot of people, and I find it a bit sad, got rid of their special color version just because they had it as a placeholder for this Godzilla, and that's not what this is. You see, Yuji Sakai did the concept art for Godzilla 2000, and he's the one who originated with these sort of very jagged spines and this overall design. And that's what you see in the Millennium version. It's not the film version, but it's the concept art. And it's by Yuji Sakai, the sculptor who did all this amazing work for the MonsterArts line. And I never saw this figure as a stand-in for this one. This one is very much its own thing, and when you have them both next to each other, they look and feel very different. They have the similarities in textures, but they have very different expressions, and they have very different personality, I find. It's up to you which one you like the most. I love both of them, and I wouldn't get rid of either of them if I was forced to. So that's just my thoughts about that. So basically, if you have the special color version and you're debating whether to get this one or not, I say get it anyway. It doesn't replace this one in any way, shape, or form, I think. But yeah, enough about that one. Getting into the figure a little more itself. We're just talking about the sculpt. It really captures the expressiveness of the face, I find. It's got those bright yellow eyes, and that what I really like about this Godzilla is he's got that just from it doesn't come up as well on camera, but the expression he has on his face, especially looking straight on with his mouth open, is sort of very classic. Well, you can make his jaw look very goofy though if you don't know how to position it right, but if you do, you can get him looking really cool, because he is this very sort of iconic sort of expression and that sort of jawline that you find on the Millennium Godzillas. Another thing about the sculpt that is a real highlight are the spines. Like I said, Yuji Sakai is the one who came up with these sort of jagged spines, like we saw on the Millennium release there. But here, they're just done perfectly to how they are in the film. And it's a real pleasure to behold in person, I'd say. As with, it's just a general thing about the MonsterArts line that they seem to really get right is the spines, which is great. Actually, a funny thing that I will bring up, and this is a tiny quality control issue, which is probably this figure's biggest letdown just across the board from what I've heard from other collectors and reviews. But this is one that I haven't seen come up, because other than this one and a tiny little other thing, this one, quality control wise, is actually really good. And it's actually on this side. He came with a loose spine. Just after I did my initial review, well, not review, unboxing, I found this out when I was just exploring this figure a little more. And this one here, as you can see, it can come out. So I don't believe it was because I can see glue still on it, so I think this one might have just been bumped out of place or something, and it does kind of squeeze in back in with no problem, so I probably will glue that in properly one day, but I have found that it holds in there pretty well when you put it in right. It slots in there pretty nicely, about as strong or maybe a little bit looser than most ball joints. But that's just something to be aware of, and yeah, like I said, I'm thinking about gluing that back in, but something you have to be careful with various glues when dealing with plastic is some of them are made with pretty strong solvents as the base. So some glues can eat through some plastics. And when you're dealing with a figure like this, you want to be very careful and make sure that doesn't happen. So just be mindful that I might do another video on that if I find a good glue or whatever. But for the moment, these figures usually just sit the way they are and then just sort of displayed. So I'm not too worried about that falling out. But yeah, going more deeper into the sculpt, like I said, the face is really well done. The paint on mine is actually pretty good. The teeth are done really nicely. Let's see. My focus is set to about there, but I'll probably zoom in a little later for just a really good look at this guy for you guys. But you can see that the sculpt is really immaculate. I have no issues with anything in the sculpt. Some people say his neck's a bit too long or something. I don't think so. Or at least it doesn't bother me. This Godzilla did have a pretty long neck, and sort of this figure feels a little smaller than some of your other MonsterArts, but actually, he's sort of like a middle-sized one. Recently, we've got some big ones with Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Earth or like, you know, the anime Godzilla and some ones like that. But this one, he seems to match sort of a little. He feels bigger than, say, the 54 Godzilla. That's kind of like a small, medium sort of size Godzilla, sort of very standard size. And he feels a little bigger. But that said, this design in general has a very sleek feel about it. He's got a very pointed tip to his tail, very, you know, thin, pointy spines, and sort of a slender jaw and spikes and everything. So that's kind of what gives him like a slightly smaller impression, and because he's not as bulky as, say, something like what I picture as like the definitive MonsterArts figure, the the 1996 or 5, I forgot which one it is, but the Heisei Birth Virgin. So this one's kind of, this guy feels pretty bulky, so anything that feels a little smaller than him seems to me to be smaller, but this guy, remember, this guy was a bigger figure back in its day for the MonsterArts line, so this guy's pretty standard size, nothing to complain about. And I'm kind of jumping into a size comparison now, but I will get to a proper size comparison later. But yeah, that's just kind of the feel of his size, and he actually stacks up pretty well with Kiryu, even though he does appear a little shorter depending on how you have him posed, but that's kind of how they were in the film, if I do recall. I've actually got him bent down a little bit. You can straighten him out a little bit more, give him a little more presence. And if I can get them in frame. So yeah, they can stare at each other face to face with no problem. They size up really well, because remember, these two are in the same film together. Well, technically, this Mechagodzilla is from Tokyo SOS, this Kiryu, and this one was from Godzilla Against Mechagodzilla, which is same characters but slightly different, how would I say, wearing on them. This guy had a scar in the film that this guy was in, and this guy had blue cannons in the first one, and yada yada yada. It doesn't matter, same basic figures. Which does bring me to, this one's definitely gonna get a re-release with the scar on his chest, I guarantee you, because that's kind of what MonsterArts are known for. When they have amazing new sculpts, and then they tend to re-release their figures slightly different paint jobs or stuff going on with them, and they usually come with some effects. That's the pattern we've been seeing with MonsterArts at the moment. So I'll just take Kiryu away. Actually, the fun thing about this Godzilla is, in the movie, I wasn't too connected to this Godzilla. Like, I thought the design was cool, and I liked some aspects of it a lot, especially when I was younger. But then it's sort of like it lacked personality just based on the film, because Kiryu pretty much stole the show in those two films. Kiryu being, you know, built from the bones of the original Godzilla, and all the story was centered around Kiryu. This Godzilla just sort of appeared and attacked and didn't really have much any personality at all, apart from just a mindless Godzilla. But as a design, I did really enjoy this one, so that's why I picked this figure up. And, well, you know, I can't resist the Yuji Sakai sculpt. It's just a very special thing, especially done so well. And the more time I spend with this figure, the more I appreciate this Godzilla, I think. Really, just a really beautifully done version of this design. I mean, even look at the legs and just all the detail under here and down the tail. One thing about MonsterArts' progress in the way they're making figures that I've really been happy about is the way they've been doing the tails. Bad example, the tail falls apart. That's not what I mean. That's been like the things have been falling apart on these figures since the start, but it's never been an issue. But this one, like a few other reviewers have said, holds its pose really well, apart from this tip here, which I assure you is just messing with me because I'm filming right now. Usually it's not a problem. But, like, you can get really big bends out of this thing, and they will hold their pose no matter what. It's a very, very sturdy tail, very organic feeling. It's like the best of both worlds, because that Millennium figure that I brought out before, the Millennium figure was where they really excelled with the tail, where they got that organic motion. But again, see, stuff has always been falling off. So you can see very organic motion, segmented till practically the very tip on the Millennium, and that is something that they have since been pretty much carrying through with all their Godzilla figures, which I'm very happy about. It's just an extra little touch that makes the biggest difference, because you can really articulate these things very well. I mean, this one is articulated till about here, and then that's a solid piece, but this is so small you wouldn't really be articulating that anyway. But it's far better than anything, like I said, earlier in the line they had the birth version, which, although sculpt-wise and just paint and quality control and just expression-wise is probably the best Heisei Godzilla you can get for in this scale, and just one of my favorite MonsterArts figures, has a very poorly articulated tail, because they used the same engineering they did with the very first release. So you can get like you can get some motion out of it, but it doesn't always line up perfectly, and it's clunky, and this whole end section here is a big solid block. So it's got a very limiting tail to what is essentially one of their very best figures. And that's something we've seen them improve upon in their line, though arguably their quality control has gone down, though I've been pretty lucky with these figures, and I think it's more a case that a lot of the poorer quality stuff that we're seeing people complain about may have been there from the start. It's just had more people have gotten into talking about these figures and reviewing them, that since the line has grown, more awareness has been put on these issues and more of a focus. So it's hard to say whether whether the quality control has drastically gone up or down, or whether it's just been a slight increase, or who knows. Speaking of quality control, the only issue that I've really had on my figure is that on these toenails on this side, there is a little bit too much black showing through. They didn't really highlight this nail enough. That is the only thing that really stands out, and it's not even too bad, to be honest. It's not very noticeable, but it is something that's there. Other than that, the spines are done beautifully. They're shaded nicely. They look really natural and organic, the way they go down the tail. There's no blobs or anything on them. The rest of the paint is pretty much a flat charcoal gray. Maybe some subtle highlights that you can't even really notice, but they're just there. Just really nice to see. The eyes on mine are also pretty good. Let's just raise the camera here. You can see he's got those really pretty yellow eyes, which I love about this design. And it's kind of hard to see from the front, and that's why it doesn't really bother me, even if the eyes are a tiny bit off, because you don't really look at him front on. But mine, from what I can tell, looking at him in person, he's actually really good. Like, you see right there, his eyes look pretty good, and you can kind of get the jaw more in line. But yeah. And like I said, the teeth are really nicely done on my version. They're very cleanly done. The sculpt has that nice sort of semi-sharp sculpt to it. Looks very organic. Really captures the face of this Godzilla. Another element that's unique to this sort of Millennium Godzilla is this sort of slightly frilled neck here, and I think it's sculpted really beautifully. Like, it's not my favorite thing in a Godzilla design, but it's what kind of helped make this Godzilla look a little more unique. And it really helps to break up the sculpt a bit more, having that texture, that slightly more fine texture down the neck here, which I really like, and just the way it's done by Yuji Sakai here is impeccable. There's nothing I can say that's bad about the sculpt, really. That's why I really love MonsterArts figures, because first and foremost, they always make sure they have a great sculpt, and each figure, unless it's a re-release, is always fully re-sculpted. Like, they didn't just where is it again? They didn't get the Millennium design and just tweak the face and release that as a new figure, like a line like NECA would. No, what they do is they build a figure from the ground up. They have their own unique articulation for each figure. So all of them are designed slightly differently, and they try out new things, and they're always evolving, and they're always putting out great stuff in that respect. So speaking of the articulation, for the most part, I think it's really solid. Nothing like, apart from the tail, nothing like too fancy, but everything works. And to be honest, there's nothing bad about anything in this articulation, I'd say. Oh, and there goes the spine. Alright, so it is looking like I will have to be gluing that spine in if I'm intending to handle this figure anymore, but just something to note. But yeah, so the articulation, like, especially since some of the earlier releases, has definitely gotten better. And I find that there's no major gaps on this one. Like, the legs work really well. Like, I don't really like the segments and reviews where they just go over all the articulation. It's just kind of unnecessary, but I'll just briefly show you that, you know, you can get him to kick forward really nicely, especially the pivot on his feet is really good, which is important for dynamic poses. You can lean him backwards and forwards quite a bit, which is good. You can look up quite a lot. You can probably lift his tail up a bit more to stretch him back, but it's more than a lot of Godzillas are, and you can look down quite considerably too. So and it looks natural when you move it, which is something really important, because some of these figures can occasionally look pretty unnatural the way you move it, especially the way the spine's split. But on this one, they managed to make the sculpt not break up too much when you move it forward, and I'm really happy about that. The arms, sometimes around the shoulders, you can kind of see light coming through, or the gap can look big. But this is a really easy fix. You really just have to play with those ball joints, because there's probably a double ball joint in there that you can move up. Like you can see, there's a tiny speck of light there, but that's not a big deal. At least not to me. Because the movement in these arms is very smooth and it holds really well, and makes for a very expressive figure. Overall, the more time I spend with this one, the more impressed I am with it, and the less negative stuff I have to say, if anything at all. You can see, just a great classic MonsterArts figure, very posable, works very well with your displays. I haven't tried if you can put a beam in his mouth. I'm sure you can, but another problem, and this is probably my only other problem with this figure, is that when you get his mouth open to anything really wide, anything really above, say, this, it bends the wrong sort of way and starts to look a little bit silly. This is another problem I've had with the 1954 figure, which is another figure that I really love, but this is just a thing that really bugs me, that when I open his mouth, it's angled in a way that it looks like his jaw is a bit broken, and then his lower jaw is longer than his top jaw, which is kind of just a thing that bothers me, I think, more than a lot of other people, but it's something there to consider, and it's something that a lot of other MonsterArts figures go well out of their way not to do. In fact, a lot of them, when they open their jaw, the actual bottom jaw seems to be shorter than the top jaw, the wider they're opened, which looks a little more natural and less distracting. But I do like to have him displayed with his jaw slightly open, or a little bit more open for looking at him at the front, because aside from it angling off sometimes because it's on a ball joint, which is easy to fix, from the front I really like to see inside his mouth. And another thing is, the inside of his mouth isn't too glossy. It's got that sort of really maroon red deep color in there, which I think looks really nice. Looks very accurate to the character, and I actually really like the way that looks. Overall, the paint on mine, like I said, apart from that toenail, is really good. No complaints here. A lot better than some of the other figures, like, say, the 54 one, which is black and white in color, but they were missing some paint on the nails and stuff, which wasn't the best. But yeah, that's what I have to say about the paint and the sculpt and the articulation on this guy. Just overall really solid. Before we get into the full-on size comparison, though, I will just show him off next to my only other version of this character, being this big Bandai figure. I think he's like, I don't know, 8 or 9 inches tall, and you can see kind of like a lot of the elements of this design and how they were translated between figures. And obviously I think the MonsterArts did a very good job, especially compared to this one. This is actually the Tokyo SOS version, you can see by the scratch here, but still a really cool design and executed really well on both figures. I love them both for what they are. And yeah, so I'm going to conclude the video in a sec, but first I'll just cut to a size comparison for you guys. So see you in a sec. So I hope you enjoyed that size comparison there. So in conclusion, to sum up my thoughts about this figure, I really love this figure. I have really nothing majorly wrong with it in all essence. I think this is a really solid release from S.H. MonsterArts, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more stuff like this from them and new sculpts. That's the most important thing. Just keep up the good work and keep bringing out great sculpts like this. That's what really will make us collectors happy. While I wouldn't necessarily give this figure my Jet Jaguar seal of approval, which is sort of the highest quality seal of approval that I'd give to a figure, that's really because of just the tiniest quality control issues here, like the broken uh, the spine and the claw, the color on the claws here a little bit, and the jaw. The spine I could probably forgive just because they did glue it. It was just probably knocked out. But the jaw looking a little goofy is probably the biggest thing for me. But really, I think if this Godzilla were a Godzilla suit that I'd have more of a connection with, like say Final Wars Godzilla, or something like that, one of the ones that I really love, or maybe the one from 1974, or oh god, there's so many really cool ones, but King Kong versus Godzilla, that one's really awesome. Or just it's good that we're getting out of the Heisei era. That's very good, and we're getting new sculpts. But I'm really waiting for a Final Wars MonsterArts. Then this one would, with the issues that it has, if it were that figure, it would definitely get my seal of approval, because this is in the quality that if they kept bringing out stuff of this quality sculpt and this quality paintwork, then that would be enough to make me a very happy collector. So yeah, that's my review of the 2002 Godzilla by S.H. MonsterArts. So don't forget to like and subscribe and all that jazz. It really helps out me and the channel, and it's just really awesome of you guys when you do. The channel has grown so much since I first started, and far more than I'd ever expect, and I really appreciate you guys checking this out, my content and all this stuff, because you know, I love these figures, and I love bringing you guys these videos, and being able to film this stuff, film my collection and share it with you guys and share my thoughts has really helped it come to life, I feel. So yeah, may all your vinyl be irradiated vinyl. Over and out.